the night of September 26, 1983. A 44-year-old Soviet lieutenant colonel sat alone in a bunker deep beneath Moscow, staring at a computer screen that was screaming nuclear Armageddon. The red lights were flashing. The alarms were wailing. His superiors would expect him to report what the sophisticated early warning system was telling him. 5 American intercontinental ballistic missiles were racing toward Soviet soil. Protocol demanded he immediately alert his commanders, who would then wake Premier Yuri Andropov to authorize a retaliatory strike. The fate of civilization hung in the balance, and it all came down to one man's split-second decision. His name was Stanislav Petrov, and you've probably never heard of him. Yet this unassuming officer with tired eyes and a methodical mind holds the distinction of being the person who quite literally saved the world. The world on the brink. To understand the magnitude of Petrov's decision, we must first grasp the terrifying context of 1983. The Cold War had reached a fever pitch that historians now recognize as perhaps the most dangerous period in human history. Just 3 weeks earlier, Soviet fighters had shot down Korean Airlines Flight 007, killing all 269 people aboard, including a US congressman. President Reagan had publicly called the Soviet Union an evil empire, and both superpowers were locked in an arms race that had produced enough nuclear weapons to destroy Earth dozens of times over. The Soviet leadership was paranoid and aging. Premier Andropov, former head of the KGB, was convinced that the Americans were planning a first strike. Soviet military doctrine was clear. Any nuclear attack would be met with immediate and overwhelming retaliation. It was a policy of mutually assured destruction, and everyone understood the rules of this deadly game. Except on that September night, the rules were about to be tested in the most harrowing way imaginable. Petrov was deputy chief of operations at Serpukhov 15, a top-secret facility that housed the Soviet Union's early warning radar system, known as OK. This was no ordinary military installation. It was the nerve center of Soviet nuclear defense, equipped with satellites that could detect the heat signature of launched missiles anywhere on Earth. The system was supposed to be foolproof, a technological marvel that would give the Soviet Union the precious few minutes needed to launch a counterstrike before American missiles could reach their targets. The night everything went wrong at 12:15 a.m., the impossible happened. The computer screens lit up with a terrifying message. Launch. A single missile had been detected, rising from an American base and streaking toward the Soviet Union. Petrov's training kicked in. He reached for the phone to alert his superiors, then stopped. Something felt wrong. Why would the Americans launch just one missile? It made no strategic sense. If you're starting a nuclear war, you don't fire a single shot, you fire everything you have to ensure maximum destruction and prevent retaliation. One missile seemed almost ... tentative. Petrov made his first crucial decision. He classified it as a false alarm, but the computer wasn't finished with him. Minutes later, the system detected a second missile, then a third, a fourth, a fifth. Now the screens showed 5 American ICBMs hurtling toward Soviet territory, and every alarm in the facility was screaming bloody murder. The other officers in the bunker looked to Petrov with a mixture of terror and expectation. Standard operating procedure was crystal clear. Report the attack immediately. Here's where the story takes its most chilling turn. Petrov later admitted that he wasn't entirely sure he was making the right choice. The pressure was unimaginable. His own life, his career, his family, everything hung in the balance. If he was wrong and failed to report a real attack, the Soviet Union would be caught defenseless. Millions would die, and he would be remembered as the man who allowed his country to be destroyed. But Petrov possessed something that the sophisticated computers and rigid protocols lacked: human intuition honed by years of experience. The numbers still bothered him. 5 missiles. Even for a limited first strike, it seemed oddly small. The American nuclear arsenal contained thousands of warheads. Why risk everything on such a modest attack? The decision that saved the world in a moment of breathtaking courage, or perhaps terrifying uncertainty. Petrov made the decision that changed history. He picked up the red phone and reported the incident as a computer malfunction, not an attack, a glitch. For 20 agonizing minutes, Petrov sat in that bunker, knowing that if he was wrong, Soviet cities would soon be vaporized. He waited for the flash of nuclear fire on the horizon. He waited for confirmation that he had just doomed his entire civilization. But the missiles never came, because they were never there. The sophisticated ecosystem had mistaken sunlight reflecting off clouds for the heat signature of launched missiles. A trick of light and shadow had nearly triggered the end of the world. The cover-up and forgotten hero. What happened next reveals the tragic irony of Petrov's situation. Rather than being hailed as a hero, he was quietly reassigned. The Soviet military was embarrassed by the system failure and didn't want to draw attention to how close they had come to launching an accidental nuclear war. Petrov was told to keep quiet about the incident, and for years, he did. The world continued spinning, blissfully unaware of how close it had come to ending on that September night. Children went to school the next day. Lovers met for coffee. Politicians gave speeches. Artists created masterpieces. Scientists made discoveries. All of it possible because one man trusted his instincts over his orders. Petrov's story only emerged in 1998, revealed by a retired Russian general in an interview. By then, the Cold War was over, the Berlin Wall had fallen, and the world had moved on to new crises. But historians began to recognize the true magnitude of what had happened in that bunker. Nuclear war experts, including those who had worked in the American military during the 1980s, confirmed that a Soviet report of incoming missiles would likely have triggered an immediate nuclear response. The weight of solitude, perhaps the most haunting aspect of Petrov's story, is its essential loneliness. He made the most important decision in human history completely alone, with no one to consult and no time to deliberate. There was no committee, no panel of experts, no democratic process, just one exhausted officer staring at flashing red lights and deciding whether civilization would see another dawn. When Petrov finally broke his silence years later, he was characteristically modest about his role. "I was just doing my job," he insisted. But historians know better. His job was to report what the computers told him. His humanity compelled him to think beyond the protocol, to question what seemed illogical, to trust human judgment over mechanical certainty. Stanislav Petrov died in May 2017, at age 77, in relative obscurity. His passing was noted by a few news outlets, but it didn't make front-page headlines. The world had largely forgotten the man who saved it. He lived his final years on a modest pension, in a simple apartment, carrying the weight of a secret that had taken decades to fully appreciate. Yet here lies the profound truth of Petrov's legacy. Sometimes the most important moments in history happen in absolute silence, witnessed by no one, recorded by no cameras, applauded by no crowds. Sometimes saving the world looks like nothing more than an aging officer rubbing his tired eyes and making one last careful decision before the end of his shift. In an age of artificial intelligence and automated systems, Petrov's story serves as a haunting reminder of the irreplaceable value of human judgment, intuition, and the courage to question what we're told when something doesn't feel right. The next time you look up at the stars, remember Stanislav Petrov, a man who ensured there would still be someone left to look up and wonder at the infinite possibilities of a world that almost was